All right, we're venturing on into Module 2. And so now that we've done all of this work with adding and subtracting integers, now it only makes sense to start tackling the multiplication and division. And that's what we're going to do in Module 2. So your essential question today, which is just there on the front page of that screen, is, and I always like to write it this way now, how do I multiply integers? So the first thing that we're going to do after we get our question written down here is take a look, see if you can remember way back to second, third grade when you first started getting into this idea of multiplication. Do you remember what it meant? What does it mean to multiply? So if I said 3 times 2, do you remember what that means? Well, you might have probably started it this way: 3 groups of 2. Okay, and maybe you actually drew some sort of pattern in arrays. So there's a group of 2, there's a group of 2, there's a group of 2. And then you started thinking, oh, so really I just have to count all these up. Okay, so I think this way: I have plus 2, I have another plus 2, you have another plus 2, and that really means I get a total of 6. Oh, and you're like, Miss Best, we're in 7th grade. I think I got adding, and I think I can do 3 times 2. Well, of course, we've got to review a little bit so we can take it one step farther. Okay? 3 groups of 2 is 6, yes, but what does it really mean? It means repeated addition. Okay, so multiplication is some sort of repeated addition problem. Boom, 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 boom. Okay, so if I said to you, well then, what would 3 times negative 2 mean? So think about that for a second. Well, we just said that this is like saying 3 groups of negative 2. Or in other words, in context of a situation, a real world situation, this says Henry made 3 withdrawals of $2 each from his savings account. Okay, a withdrawal means taking out or subtracting from, so it's a negative value. So to be 3 groups of negative 2. And if you think of that with counters here, there's a group of negative 2, here's a group of negative 2, and here's that third group of negative 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Or you have negative 2, I add another negative 2, you add another negative 2. So whichever way makes sense to you, number line way, counter way, this value actually ends up equaling negative 6. In this case, it would be negative $6. Okay, so what does this mean? It means, again, it's a repeated addition. And it's 3 groups of negative 2. Okay, well, then really, it's just kind of like last module in a sense, all right? Because if I have 5 groups of negative 3, either draw it out in your head or think about it, my answer is going to be negative because this means negative 3 plus negative 3 plus negative 3 plus negative 3 plus negative 3 again, and you get negative 15. This means 10 groups of negative 6. Yikes. I don't think I want to draw that out, right? Can you visualize what that means? I have 10 groups of negative 6. Negative 6 plus negative 6 plus negative 6. Aha. Answer is going to be negative. Multiply the absolute values. I get 60. There you go. 7 groups of negative 6. All right. Counting by negative 6s, you'd have to do 7 of them. Your final answer is going to be negative because this is just a repeated addition problem of negative numbers. You get negative 42. What do you notice about the sign of your answers? Aha, the sign is negative. All right. Okay, now let's take a look at this situation. What would negative 3 times negative 2 mean? Okay, now how can I have, because this, I always thought of this first number as the groups. So how can you have negative 3 groups? Well, you can't if you're counting. So here's how we think of what that means. Okay, what this means is that we are going to take the opposite number, because that negative sign also sometimes means opposite. So I'm going to take the opposite of 3 groups of negative 2. Okay, so instead of, well, I could draw it out this way, negative 2, negative 2, negative 2. That gives me my 3 groups of negative 2. But because that first number said negative 3, that means the opposite of 3 groups. So I know that I land at negative 6, but now I have to take the opposite of that, which gives me positive 6. Yay! Or if it makes more sense to you to think of it as counters, think of it this way. 3 groups, let me get this over here. So I have 3 groups of negative 2. 1 group, 2 group, 3 groups. Now I'm telling you, now take the opposite of all of this. That means I have to turn them all positive. And you end up with positive 6. Oh, here I end up with positive 6. So negative 3 times negative 2 means, in general, think of it as 3 groups of negative 2, but then take the opposite because of that sign in front. Which means if I have to take negative 5 times negative 3, I'm thinking the opposite of 5 groups of negative 3, which really should be the opposite of negative 15. Okay, this opposite sign, and then 5 times negative 3. Well, who wants to clutter up your answer with all those negative signs? This really just ends up being positive 15. Negative 10 times negative 6. Oh, notice something here? I don't even have to put that raised dot in there to indicate the multiplication operation. I can just say, take this number, and if there's nothing in between, it implies multiplication. I think that's just because math people get lazy with writing so much. But anyway, this means the opposite of 10 groups of negative 6. So I want the opposite of negative 60, which is going to be positive 60. Negative 7 times negative 6. This means the opposite of 7 times negative 6. That means the opposite of negative 42. It's positive 42. Yay! What do you notice about the sign of your answers this time? Well, the signs were all positive. So, So I think we're getting to the point of where we can start to notice a pattern here. If I have 2 numbers and I just have one negative sign, okay, then what I can do is say, all right, negative 4 times 12. This is kind of like saying the opposite of 4 groups of 12. I know the number part is 48, and I have to have a negative sign there. This, the first negative sign, means I have to take the opposite of 5 groups of negative 10, which would be negative 50. Negative, the opposite of a negative is a positive. So your final answer, always simplify it as much as you can. No one in their right mind wants to look at 2 negative signs in a row. Blech. Negative 17 times 0. Now, before you even think of, all right, the opposite of 17 groups is 0. Hello? It's 0. 0 is like the Arnold Schwarzenegger, in other words, the Terminator, of multiplication, because no matter what you're multiplying by, the minute you have a 0 there, destroys everything. Everything turns into just plain old 0. And remember, it doesn't make sense to say the opposite of 0, because 0 is not positive, it's not negative. So it's just 0. 13 times negative 3, 13 groups of negative 3. On the number line, this would just be hopping backwards, man. Boop, 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 boop. Or if you're doing groups, 13 groups, negative, 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 and so on, and so on, and so on. When I multiply the values there, it's 39. My sign has to be negative. All right, this first one, I'm saying the opposite of 25 groups of negative 4. Okay, in theory, then you would say the opposite, 25 of negative 4 would be negative 100, but bleh, why have all that negativity in your life? Ha! Positive. So do you start to see the general pattern? When you have two numbers and both you have the same sign where both signs are positive or both signs are negative, the sign of your answer, the answer is positive. Okay, now that's different from when you were adding. Okay, if you added two negative numbers, it's more negative. But here, negative times negative gives you a positive answer. The number part of your answer is you multiply the absolute values. So basically, just keep track of what the sign has to be and multiply like normal. All right. Now, I think I might have missed a part here. I can't remember if I put it in your notes because it looks like I missed it here. If you have different signs, okay, where one is positive and one is negative, then here's what's going on. The sign of your answer is always negative. And once again, though, the number part of your answer, all you have to do is multiply the absolute values. So no matter what, multiply the absolute values and figure out the sign of your answer. Jump to page 39 in your textbook. Let's take a look at a few of these together, okay? Oops, 39 was back here. I think I wanted you to jump down to the bottom to the your turn, okay? Let's crank through these. Stop the video for a second. Do these 6 problems quick like bunny. Rejoin me and then check your answers. All right, I have a negative times a positive. That means my answer is negative. 3 times 5 is 15. Negative times a negative. If my signs are the same with two numbers, my answer is positive. Multiply 10 and 2. Now you don't have to put the plus sign there. I do just because it helps me keep track that I checked and verified what the sign of my answer should be. Negative 42, 0. This is positive 45. And a positive times a positive, of course, is positive 32. All right. Check on Schoology to see what your assignment is in the book. And as always, may the force be with you. Watch your signs.